Hey, welcome to Driven by Design, the one show, the only show that shows you the future of automotive design with our driven designer himself, Bryan Thompson. Hey, Bryan.
Hello. Good morning.
You have brought along somebody else who is similarly driven by this passion to put people on wheels here.
Yeah, I have a very special guest today. Every guest is special, but this one is super special.
Super special, all right.
Yeah, I've got Gabriel Wartofsky here today, who is also a car designer, and he's been in and out of the industry. And I thought he'd be a great guest because he works one foot in the OEM industry, and OEM means, of course, that those are the car companies that we all know and love. He's designed for Honda and Acura. He's designed for BMW, but he's also designed for the more esoteric world of mobility. And I want to talk about what is the future of mobility today. Paul, I was in Palm Springs yesterday, and I was looking at mid-century modern homes for an event I'm going to host for an LGBT scholarship that I have. And I was thinking about these homes are a lot like what's coming in the car industry. And so that's why I wanted to get with Gabriel today, because he's worked in the typical car industry, but he's also has this vision of what's coming and how it is a bit more like a residential home design. So without further ado, welcome, Gabriel, to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I'm proud that you're here. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Gabriel. Give us like the 30,000 foot of like, I'm interested that you've worked with Honda and car companies, but tell us like, what excites you about design?
I think, and I was listening to the podcast before, and what you talked about, having connection and reconnecting people is what brings me, reconnecting people with joy is what design is all about for me. I think we live in complicated times. We have a lot of things going on, but remembering that there is joy in everyday life and designing products and cars around that. I come from a family, mother is a dancer, my father's a painter. So there's always something about painting and creating and documenting movement. And I think that's how I got into cars, frankly, is cars are this special. We were just having a conversation before about they have a special meaning. We anthropomorphize them. They have a personality. We name them and we move in them. And I think moving and keeping things dynamic is a huge inspiration.
That's an interesting thing, too, that you say about anthropomorphizing cars. So, in this world of design, products and cars and architecture, we don't always anthropomorphize appliances. Sometimes, but, you don't really give your washing machine a personality.
I can think of a few.
Yeah. Maybe, and there are some. But really, a car always has a face and a personality. And I think that's something that makes car design unique. I think let's dive into it, because one of the great things, Paul, that you brought up earlier before we got on air here is what's if we live in a world where we are connected to our cars, we see ourselves in the cars literally have two eyes and a nose and a mouth like people do. What happens as we shift from the cars you drive to the cars you commute in that are driving you? What do you think will happen to that sort of connection we have?
I think I think we were sold a dream that a car is an avatar, is a suit that you wear, is something that defines who you are, socioeconomically, this or that. So, now, I work downtown in LA and people ride scooters and bikes, and it's kind of moving away from the car and away from this notion of the joy of movement. You're stuck in traffic half the time when you're in a car. So I think cars have a form of connection. You connect to them, but they also distance you from other things. And I think
you mean because you're isolated inside?
You're isolated in them.
Yeah.
So I think, to your point, the connection aspect is if moving to other modes of mobility sometimes breeds another type of connection and identity. I think and also or before the show you had mentioned you had referenced the horse and buggy era, and I always thought it was interesting that before there were cars, before we had this thing called driving, a drunk cowboy could get home from a bar on his horse because the horse knew the way. Yeah.
Right. The horse kind of knew his way home and it could get him home. And then all of a sudden we got rid of the horse and the horse became recreational.
Yeah.
And the car, you had to drive it, and drunk driving was invented. So, but talk to me about this connection to the horse as what happens now in a world where a self-driving car can almost be a bit like a horse.
Yeah, I think Jeff Wardle actually brought this in, who is an instructor at Art Center, who I love. I studied under, but he brought this up a lot. He was a huge early adopter of the notion of autonomous mobility. And I think what he said, and I was also in the electric bike industry, and in the U.S. we ride bikes recreationally, not as transport. And there's the same notion as like a horse We don't need to ride a horse every day, but we can have a great time during the weekend on a horse. Same with sailboats and tugboats. Tugboats are for hauling trash, for utility, and then a sailboat is to enjoy. So I think that ties into cars. We don't need them for every single purpose, everything that we do every day.
Oh, interesting.
But we can still enjoy them.
So you see the future of, so that's interesting. So this idea that when people say, oh, they're going to take my steering wheel away, you're going to take my car away. You see that the cars you drive will still be there, but that's more of a recreational side of life.
If you still have an attachment, I think we're of a generation that loves cars and that still has an attachment. There is a new generation coming that a car is nothing but a place that your parents drive you in, and you have an iPad, and it's a place you can catch up on things. So I think there's an evolving sense of what the car means to us, and tying that to a larger picture of what does movement mean to us is a story I'm excited about.
When you, I know that you, for people who don't know, Gabriel also started a bike company, an electric bike. It was this really cool front-wheel drive bike long before Bird and I can't remember the other one right now. It just slipped out of my wheels. We're doing that. You've been in this world for a long time, so you've really explored different aspects of what it means to move about. You also do really impressive architecture studies. Do you find that your architecture work influences your automotive design?
Completely, yes. And also what you always say, intimate spaces. I think it's an important thing about a car interior, which are often overlooked. You're looking at the exterior. Exterior is for the world to see what you present. Interior is what you share with the closest members in your circle, in your life. It's important. I think architecture, it's the same thing. It's a space that you feel comfortable in. It's a space that you can relax in, that's away from the world, a little solace. Bikes,
We're having a visitor. We have an uninvited guest today.
Hi.
Hello, what do you want?
Hi, Alexa.
Be quiet, Alexa. We'll get back to you later. Sorry, she's just so needy today.
But I also
as you were saying,
the notion of space that's physical, but for bikes, what I learned with that company, one of the things is it's a space of nostalgia and joy. So even though you're completely exposed to all the elements, you're in a mental space of...
Bikes are nostalgia? Bikes represent nostalgia?
In the States, what we got, behavior change, changing people's behavior around how they get around takes a lot of money and a lot of time.
Okay.
And so this was a little early, the bike company. But what we learned is getting people on the bikes, they remembered how much fun they are. And it brought them back to childhood, because as Americans, most of our experience is associating bike with childhood, and then you grow up and bikes are for children. That's how a generation was raised. But the space, the psychological space that you would get these secretaries who would come out and be like, I'm not riding a bike, and then they get on, and the smiles on their faces, it's a space of joy. And I think architecturally, I try and emulate that space physically, and same with car interiors, what you do, Brian.
Bringing joy to the space. Yeah. It's interesting. I hadn't thought of this. So that's why when I'm if I'm riding a scooter, a rentable scooter, it's different than riding a rentable bike. The bike actually makes me smile. The scooter, I always feel like a little unstable and like I'm in danger. Is that
you need to wear a cape? I think so. Working at BMW, I love Segway. But you'd need a cape. Which is great.
Why would you need a cape?
Well, because you look. I just remember a friend, BMW, when I worked there, spends millions and millions of dollars of just having someone sit in a prototype to get the proportions right.
Right.
Does the head look right? Does this make the person look too small or big? So you're messing with proportion, I think, with a scooter and other things. And now they have a pogo stick. I don't know if you see it, which I wish them the best of luck, because pogo sticks are a lot of fun. But it's kind of the switch from what we were talking about. Your father worked at Chrysler, like a car is like, you are of this class, this is what you are.
Our producer here, Paul, is a car industry aficionado and veteran, and his dad worked as a Chrysler executive, right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. He keeps turning around to look at me here, everybody's like, "Who's he looking at?"
Yes.
Engineers over
He's our invisible. He's our Ross.
I'm the man with the cape, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's like now we're riding scooters and no one cares how you look. You're kind of celebrating looking
interesting, and so
foolish.
You feel a little silly. Where a bike feels a bit more proportional.
Well, I think bikes can be proportional. There's a large part of this design for the bike was making people feel comfortable on it ergonomically. You sit taller, so you're more visible to other people. There's a whole thing, but I think sitting on a bike is also familiar.
Can I ask you a quick question as I'm just listening to this? We've had a number of people from electric bike companies in here in the studio, Pedigo being one.
I know Pedigo.
And their bikes to me look like the old beach cruisers. They're big. And I thought it's the opposite of what I saw bikes moving towards the sleek, curved bicycle racing look from the 80s and 90s, where it was a real thin frame and it got thinner and thinner and thinner. Now they've gone back to these bulbous tires and big, oversized vehicles.
That's a great point, and I think that ties back to what we're talking about, is this possible fear of like autonomous cars and everything. Will that take away what we know and love about bikes? And I know Pedigo is one of the companies. You have to look at the demographic. They are designed initially, or part of them, for baby boomers who love cruisers. It was of a certain time.
So you think of
they're really comfortable too. Cruisers are very comfortable, and you're selling electric bikes initially to people who associate them as regular bikes as weekend toys. And so you want to make them look sturdy, and if you got some back problems or anything, electric bikes help you.
So you're considering who you're designing for.
You're considering who you're designing for. And then there's also, you can have that, and then you can have the super sleek bikes too. But Pedigos are, big comfy bikes.
You brought up something that I don't want to forget that I thought was really interesting when you sort of casually mentioned that at your time in BMW that you will spend a lot of time studying how the vehicle looks proportionally around the person inside. I think that's probably an interesting thing that people don't realize about car design. It's not just putting pen to paper and creating a beautiful sketch. You're really thinking about the person inside. Can you talk a bit more about that?
I can, and that brings to mind Big Blue Bus of Santa Monica. I did a Bus of the Future campaign for them, and they're trying to encourage more white-collar workers to ride the metro and the bus. And so we did a survey with a bunch of people, why don't you ride the bus? And one thing that stuck out with me is one person said, because people looking through the window at the people on the bus, they look sad, they look uncomfortable, they look miserable. I don't want to look like them. I don't want to be associated with them. So that really struck in mind. And with BMW's investment, it's like when you see something fly by, you want to see the person in it, enjoy it. And so you see yourself doing the exact same thing. And riding on a bike, seeing a smile is better than, maybe a cape and on something a little more uncomfortable. That's
an interesting point, because I think that as we get into, because so much of what we work on in car design now, which is, and I'll just remind listeners and viewers that typically in car design we work about 7 to 10 years out. So this kind of world we live in is a strange place where it's sort of in the future, always looking back on the present as if it's the past, right? So if we imagine a world where the debate for whether or not autonomous cars are coming is sort of over, and that they are going to be here. How do you handle that exact thing you're talking about? When people say, I don't want to sit on a bus and look miserable, are they going to be miserable in these cars that are carrying them around, or are we considering those things in designing those spaces?
Completely considering. I mean, I think we're in a transitional period now where we're still believing the dream we're sold that a car is freedom, a notion of freedom. But actually, I was raised by biking hippies. I love cars, but my parents used to call them coffins on wheels, because a lot of people look dead in them. If you're in a traffic jam, or like the beginning of every famous LA movie, there are people in a traffic jam looking miserable. So if there's a lot of work with autonomous mobility, how else can you spend that time? Giving your time back, what can you do to reconnect people to do this? It's like a huge frontier that I think we'll speak to. If you see someone happy in an autonomous car, you want to ride an autonomous
You want to try it.
Yeah.
Can I ask one more question here? I don't want to take over the camera. There's a million questions I could be asking you guys, and I'm sure everybody else is thinking here too. But the key one that you just brought up, is the driving experience going to go back to the horse and buggy days and be communal? Or is it still going to be a solo place that you escape from the world?
That's a great question.
Oh, I mean, we have Uber. I just saw the new Tarantino movie, and there was a huge hitchhiking through line with it, which I could never imagine because I was raised in the 80s.
Yeah.
You don't hitchhike.
Right, it's dangerous.
But you did it in the 50s and 60s. And now with, rideshare programs, there's a lot of connecting that you do. And my brother's a comedian, and I think he helped with the show, the Taxi Cab Confession Show, and where you connect with people and complete strangers. Yeah. And I think in LA, a city, and we were talking about this earlier, that was designed in a certain redesign in the 60s to keep communities apart. The car and the shuttle provides a huge opportunity to bring people back together, to intermingle a little more. Shared rides. Yes.
And you bring up to spin on that, what do you see people doing? So if you're no longer driving, let's say if you're not actively driving and you're commuting, and you do have your weekend car that your Bugatti or your Datsun that's been renovated, and you go take that on the weekends and you enjoy it, but you're in this spirit, you're in this mode of commuting to work. What do you see people doing in these cars? I understand that the concept is connection, but what are they? How are they connecting?
Hopefully not working out. That's a huge concept. When everyone, I remember in design school, a lot of people are like, you put a treadmill in it, and then you just, the sweat, the smells. I think we talked about this a few times. Yeah. Well, there are a lot of activities that people do in cars both adult and not.
That's a good point. Could you see a world where, the W Hotel, I think what you're talking about is people connecting, there's spiritual connection and there's sort of like the more human basic connection. Everybody has had sex in a car at some point, right? I mean, I think. Yeah. I mean, that's why we have bench seats, right? So babies can be made. Yeah. Baby boomers made babies in bench seats, right? But do you see a world where the W Hotel has autonomous hotel rooms?
Oh my God, completely. So working now there's electric mobility. You can't really sell a car because it's got a V8 engine anymore in the future. Looking into the future, assuming that we're doing that. Yeah. So you sell an experience. And so do you sponsor experience? You have the W Hotel shuttle. You get
outside of clubs at night.
Kabuki
waiting.
One.
Yeah. So it sort of picks you up, takes you around the city and deposits you and cleans itself?
Cleans itself. You don't have to worry about any of that. Definitely not. Yeah.
And interesting. So in that moment, those people inside look really happy. Or maybe you don't see them.
So there's actually, and I'm trying to think of the Japanese, it's a ride share program where you can rent cars, electric cars. And they just did a survey because they found out people aren't really riding these cars. They're renting the cars, but not moving them. And so they found out in Tokyo that these people are sleeping in the cars, that they're doing auditions. If they're YouTube celebrities, they're recording in the cars. So they're using these vehicles for not the intended purpose of driving around. It's a private space.
I actually read that article, and it was because in Japan and in these major cities, it's hard to find a
privacy.
Mm-hmm. There's a crush of humanity on the buses, a crush of humanity on the streets. There's a crush of humanity in the offices. Yeah. Your apartment is 600 square feet. So how do you do it? They found it was so cheap, you could actually rent the car during the day and go sleep there.
And just not move at all.
It was just a private space. And that goes back to what I'm saying. I don't know that I want to be communal in a car other than maybe fooling around.
Sure.
But I was of an era, that's why we don't ride buses. That's why we didn't take to ride sharing. That's my alone time.
Yeah, I think that that makes sense too, because I would say that in the rideshare apps right now, the solo ride is still the main one, right? It's an exception when you.
And now you can tell the person if you want to talk or not.
Yeah, I saw that. The Martha Stewart ads.
Yeah,
I was I guess Martha Stewart doesn't want to talk to anybody. Yeah. You can pay more for that too, right?
Yeah.
So strange to me, but I think as a very social person, I typically take the shared rides because I'm always curious I'm just interested in people.
Yeah.
And I want to know what they're doing. And also, it's a little bit of research, right, for our industry. But I think that, that's a good point is that if you're, okay, so let's flip it. If you are not wanting to connect and you're taking this autonomous drive experience, is it sort of a doldrums experience, or is it what happens? Is it content in the space?
There can be. I always think of my father, who's recently a widower, and he's like, there's a difference between being lonely and alone. And I think alone time is a privilege now, having some privacy, having quiet, I think it can go anyway, but I think having a space where you're unplugged could be one amazing option just to reset. So instead of being hyper-connected, you can be unplugged and have a Zen little zone, I think.
So I start getting visions in my mind of a Zen design, like a little hotel room, a spa on wheels.
Like a little 15, 20-minute, spa. Transitional, and you think of transitional, this is an odd tangent, and I'll go, but PTSD was discovered, I think, around the Vietnam War. That was the first war where people flew home instead of took a boat or something. So imagine you're on the field, and then the next day you're suddenly with your wife and kids. There's no transition point. And a lot of people went crazy because you need, well, not crazy, sorry, wrong term, but you need
I know what you meant, though.
Points during a day or during your life where you have a transition where you can, switch from one mode to another. And I think transportation is, you got these transition periods during the day. If you have a high-stress job and you're going to your family, you got 20 minutes.
Can I tell you a little story about that? I grew up in that era. I was just a couple of years too young to go to Vietnam, so I had other friends with older brothers and sisters and stuff, brothers that went. And one guy was in Special Forces, and he came back and told every kid wanted to know what was it like. And he said he would never talk about it because he was a Green Beret. He was out on secret missions in the jungle. And he said, I'm going to tell you kids one story and then shut up. And so he told us, he said, and I'll never forget the story. He said he was up in the jungle. His job was to go find and capture an enemy soldier and bring him back so that they could interrogate him, right? So he's out in the jungle. He finds a Viet Cong. He bonks him on the head. He throws him over his shoulder, and he starts walking through the jungle, and he gets lost. He said,
no.
So for
This
days,
guy could have helped him.
this guy, he's got a beat up Viet Cong over his shoulder, and he's carrying this guy, and he finally realizes after a day or two the guy's dead.
Oh no!
Oh my goodness.
And he's feeling, I'm dead.
Right.
And he starts to pull out his pistol, and he puts it to his head. And at that moment, a helicopter, American helicopter, flies over, sees him, picks him up, and within 2 minutes, the guy hands him a Budweiser. And he's drinking a cold Bud
And
and
he's
listening to music on the way. And he said, 2 minutes ago, I'm thinking I'm dead, I'm in the jungle,
I've got a
I'm
gun.
alone.
Yeah.
And now I'm riding back, listening to Jimi Hendrix and drinking a beer.
Wow, if that's not a moral of life story, like just hold
that-
on. It gets better, folks.
That transition, from one shock to the other, and I think that really is the way a lot of us feel today. I'm so inundated. I want a Zen space to go. I could see that.
So I wonder if that's the trade-off in this time where if you do still have your experience of driving, that's the way that you sort of transition into this autonomous world where it's actually a nice experience. It's not this soulless appliance-like thing that people are imagining. Since we both work in this industry, I imagine a lot of ability to turn off and then turn on content coming in if you want to take news in or simply just mood information.
Yep.
That's kind of it's an interesting. The thing that I notice with this kind of stuff is that there's always the way we imagine it to be, and then there's the way people use it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so go ahead.
Well, I just think Elon Musk on the Joe Rogan interview was talking about a movie, like taking cuts. I always think of like car riding. Yes, what we're sold, like driving, passionate. And he's like, it's like filming an action movie. The actual filming of the movie is really boring.
Right,
It's just a whole day of like waiting around. But like the finished product is amazing.
amazing,
And
yeah.
like driving, the idea is amazing. But then you're stuck in traffic. It's yeah.
So it could be, there could be some benefits to what you can do with your stuff in traffic, whether it's the W Hotel experience or just a Zen experience. So to switch gears a little, we are getting close to the end here. I always like to ask people, especially very talented people like yourself, about inspiration, because that is the point of the show, is design inspiration. Who's your idol in design, and how did they inspire you? How did you get into this?
I have a lot of idols in design, but you
And it
are
doesn't
one of
have-
them, Brian. I'd love to say, because we were talking about this before, but car design, I think it's very close to my heart. It's a very like intimate thing. And when I went to school, I was like, how did you get into car design? And everyone's like, I just knew when I was a child. Yeah, it's just something, which is the most bizarre thing. I don't know if I was born in the 1800s, like would I want to design carts? I don't know. But I think what inspires me is people's face lighting up when they see something. And I think also taking a joyous approach to design, like you do, which I've always admired. You're impacting people's lives greatly with this pet or with this car that I still believe plays a role in a family or plays a role in my daily life.
Yeah.
And you get to design this thing that affects people's life, that gets them around, that gives them a comfortable, safe place to stay, sometimes sleep in the case of LA, and gives them a little, like, augments their personality a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you for Gabriel. I didn't expect you to say that. In full disclosure, 20 years ago when I was designing at Nissan, Gabriel contacted me out of the blue via an email, and I didn't know who this guy was, and he like reached out to me and set up this interview for me to do at the Advocate magazine. Remember that? And then instantly we became friends. So that is our background here. So I didn't know you felt that. That made me feel really good, Gabriel. So thank you. I think you should sort of. There's a story I want you to tell people because I think that it will be interesting to them. I think you should tell the four-leaf clover story about your mother and how that inspires you.
Definitely. And I think my mother's a huge inspiration. She's a dancer. We were talking about cars. I'm a huge car head, but I was raised by biking hippies. Well, not hippies, but artists, bohemians. And the point that they raised was my mother and I inherited this thing, and I know there are people who do this. If you look, you can find four-leaf clovers. So my mother and I, that's what we did. We would ride our bikes around as kids. And it's interesting. One thing I learned is like in some of the most desolate city blocks where the dogs piss on all the grass or whatever, that's where the four-leaf clovers grow, which you wouldn't know. But my mother and I would go to all these busy city centers or whatever. She'd stop the bike, stop traffic or whatever, get down, and look for four-leaf clovers with me. And I remember her turning up once, and she's like, see all these cars? Like, they don't see this. Magic exists every day. You just have to look.
Oh, your mom.
And you
I love your mom.
You stop, and it's what's inspired me as a designer. It's like we live in a beautiful
in a magic world.
We just have to stop and look and focus. So
Wow.
I think any type of design that enables someone to remember where they live and the beauty that surrounds them is a source of inspiration. There's so much to be negative about, but to be able to design things that remind people that there are good things out there. That's what my mother taught me. She's a huge source of inspiration. I think you continue to do that with everything you do. You make these happy spaces that people enjoy, and it's important.
It's a beautiful story. Speaking of magic, people can find your magic if they look at your website. How do people find you after
So,
this podcast?
yeah, long name, fun times. Gabriel Wartofsky is my name, Gabriel Wartofsky Design. So Wartofsky. Yeah.
And you're on
me.
social media.
I'm on
Instagram.
social media. Yeah. Super popular. I'm kind of a big deal. Yeah, really fascinating. I think I took a picture of my eggs this morning. So yeah, feel free. To follow that.
Gabriel, this was such a treat. Thank you. I think
an honor
that
to be here.
You
Thank
should
you, guys.
come a few more times to the show because it's a fun
Twist my arm.
dialogue. So, yeah. Thank you everybody for listening today. And Paul, you have a.
How did they reach you?
Oh yes, me.
We don't have to be that humble. How can they reach you?
So I'm Bryan Thompson, and
We just heard what a big deal you are, so yeah.
No, my website is Bryan Thompson Design, but I really
With a Y.
With a Y, Brian. Actually, I spelled it the wrong way too. So people that spell it that way with an I say I own that domain as well. But also, social media. I really love Instagram. That's my place where I share everything. Bryan S Thompson, Bryan with a Y, S like Scott Thompson, on all those handles. You can find me there. So thank you for listening, guys. This show is going to keep growing. I'm really excited about it. I want to explore the future of mobility, transportation here, and design inspiration every day. So stay inspired.
You've been listening to the only show that shows you the future of car design today. Right here in Orange County's only community radio station, OCTalkRadio.net.